So in this video, I want to talk about what the Russians really think about Vladimir Putin. And it's a really interesting and perplexing question trying to get to the answer of, because on one hand, they are of this mind, and on the other hand, they're of that mind. And so I'm going to start here. This morning, I was talking about this survey, and this is what kind of prompted my thinking. Um, what is your general attitude toward right now? And this is surveying Russians about other countries. So China, very favorable. Brazil, kind of favorable. Turkey, mostly favorable. Iran, mostly favorable. When you get to Israel, it's mostly unfavorable. It's about more than 50% unfavorable. Same with France, it's even more than that. The UN's more than that. The EU, even more than that. And by the time you get to US and Ukraine, it's at about 75% unfavorable with maybe about 15% or so favorable. Okay, so that's the general Russian view of these other countries. But what about Putin himself? And so we're going to try to answer that by looking at this. Now, before I show you Lex Fridman, who I'm about to show you, and we're going to see a little clip of, before we get to that, I'm going to read this. This guy has zero understanding of the background of what Putin did to his entire adult life in the KGB and FSB, or what he did in St. Petersburg, or in the 90s, or the violent way in which he took power. Well, he took power legitimately, but there was some violence behind the scenes. But okay, so let's look at this. This is Lex Fridman. Now, who is Lex Fridman? Lex Fridman is Alexei Fedotov. Fedotov? Okay, Lex Fridman is a Russian-born computer scientist that makes podcasts about machine learning and life. He is currently a researcher teacher about AI at MIT. So he's not a slouch, he's a smart guy. He has conducted many podcasts with people like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and even Jack Dorsey. So he's plugged in, and he's got a podcast or a YouTube channel with 4.4 million subscribers. So he's big. He's out there. Now he's going to be doing an interview with Zelensky not too long from now, and he wants to do an interview with Putin. And he talks about how he kind of admires Putin, or at least he hedges and says he admires the old Putin. But let's hear what he has to say here. So we're going to listen to him. It's about 5 minutes, and then I want to show you another clip from the Moscow Times, and then let you kind of decide what you think.
People, one of the fascinating things is how did power change Vladimir Putin? He was a different man when he took power than he is today. I actually, in many ways, admire the man that took power. I think he's very different than Stalin and then Hitler at the moment they took power. I think Hitler and Stalin were both, in our previous discussion, already on the trajectory of evil. I think Putin was a humble, loyal, honest man when he took power.
I'm not so sure about that. So he worked for the FSB, and he thought that the the KGB, and he thought that the KGB was actually a really good thing. He wanted to be a spy. He was serving in East Germany, and that's kind of not the greatest place for KGB officers to be working. And when the Berlin Wall fell, he was in East Germany and was part of trying to burn documents and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure that he ever started in a good way. And then he was working in St. Petersburg and with the mayor there, and kind of made his bones politically, and probably compromised quite a bit along the way. I don't see him as being a good guy who just kind of fell into an evil path. I think he started down that path a lot sooner, but that's just my perception. You tell me what you think.
The man he is today is worth thinking about and studying.
Okay. Notice he just said is worth thinking about. He's not saying he's evil or he's this or that or whatever. He's just like, oh, let's think about this. He's hedging.
I'm not sure. I'd love to talk to you about Vladimir Putin. Sort of while we're on this feeling and wave of empathy and trying to understand others that are not like us. One of the reasons
empathy for Putin. That's really interesting, because Putin doesn't seem to have a lot of empathy for others. In fact, I've seen some people talking about how he's devoid of empathy and has a kind of I don't know if it's psychopathic or sociopathic kind of tendencies in the way that he can use others and feel no remorse.
Started this podcast is because I believe that there's a few people I could talk to. Some of it is ego. some of it is stupidity. Is there some people I could talk to that not many others can talk to? The one person I was thinking about was Vladimir Putin. You know,
Yeah,
I have
he admires Vladimir Putin, and he wants to have an interview with Putin, and he likes Putin. He's trying to hedge his language so that he's not offending Putin when he gets to that.
have
So,
I actually don't have real family in Russia who don't love Putin.
isn't that
I
interesting? All his family in Russia loves Putin, he says. Now, uh, I think that there is a mix of they simultaneously, from everything I can detect, love Putin and dislike Putin simultaneously. They love Putin because they want Putin to resurrect and make Russia strong again, but they dislike Putin because they can see other problems with him. But let's hear what he has to say.
the only people who write to me about Putin and not liking him are like sort of activists who are young, right? But like to me, they're strangers. I don't know anything about them. The people I do know who have a big family in Russia, they love Putin. They
Do they miss elections?
It's a hard
Would they
question.
want the choice to prove it at the ballot box? And or are they so in love with him that they wouldn't want to take a chance that someone might vote him out?
No, they don't think of it this way, and they are aware of the incredible bureaucracy and corruption that is lurking in the shadows, which is true in Russia.
Right.
No, it's overt, and Putin spent $2 billion on a rigged election. Like, wrap that around your mind. 2 billion on that's a legitimate figure on a election that everyone knew was fixed.
Everywhere.
Everywhere, but like there's something about the Russian, it's the remnants. It's corruption is so deeply part of the Soviet system that
Hmm.
even the overthrow of the breaking apart of the Soviet Union and Putin coming and reforming a lot of the system, it's still deeply in there. And
Yeah, it is still deeply in there. And by the way, Putin is the guy that said that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. No, it's the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. But the Soviet Union kind of just overlaid on what was Tsarist kind of authoritarianism. And so it just added this super layer of ideology on this. And then that's why it paired. It worked out well. And I think Marx would have been surprised that it could have worked in Russia. He thought it was going to be something that was going to work in Europe, and it actually took hold in Russia. But there's a reason that it took hold in Russia because the ground bed was fertile for it.
and they're aware of that. That's part of the love for Putin is partially grounded in the fear of what happens when the corrupt take over, the greedy take over. And they see Putin as the stabilizer, as like a hard like force that says
A counterforce,
counter
right?
force.
Now, don't dismiss that. I think that's a legitimate thing. They do see Putin as restoring them or backing off the oligarchs or that sort of thing. So I think that's a legitimate point of why what they like about Putin, even though he's become far more authoritarian over time.
Like basically from the Western perspective, Putin is terrible, but from the Russian perspective, Putin is the only thing holding this thing together before.
Okay, so now if that is true, then you should see more love for Putin than not being poured out in with real sentiment. But what I see is something like this. This is in the Moscow Times. Russian prankster decided to play a prank on this building's residents and put a big portrait of Putin in the elevator. So let's just see how people react to this because it's a really interesting thought. Okay, so he puts this up there in the elevator, and then you're going to see how people are reacting when they come in here. They're putting a hidden camera in there, and they're getting the reactions caught on camera. So this is interesting. Man walks in the building. What the blank? He's trying to figure out what to do. Gotta take it down. They've gone insane. Another woman. Oh, what the blank? They tend to say blank a lot. Some blank put this up. I know this camera's in his eyes. He's surveilling us. That's really interesting that they would say, I know that he's surveilling us. Like, they understand that. This is horrible. I don't know what this woman's doing, or if she recognizes that the camera's there and is doing that intentionally or mocking or just what. Another person walks in, stunned. It's really interesting how they're reacting. What kind of person would put this here? This is a nightmare, this person says. Yeah, so I don't know. This one doesn't even want to look at it. Is this for real right now? She says. Another person just walks by. Doesn't even want to get in the elevator. This person stops cold as they're looking at the portrait of Putin. So this doesn't seem like the love for Putin that Lex Fridman was talking about. He's looking behind it, trying to figure out like what's going on here. Why is this here? Is it watching me or something? Nobody's looking at the hidden camera in the corner though. But there doesn't seem to be the love that Lex Fridman was talking about here. Yeah. So again, that's the Moscow Times. The Moscow Times is as biased one way as Lex Fridman is the other way, but still you're getting a perception here. So what is it? Which is it? So in my understanding, Putin is not Stalin in the sense that he does not have a communist ideology, but he is very much like that in the sense that he is more and more becoming more authoritarian. He has put up 90 of the 110 or so monuments to Stalin that exist currently in Russia. And he's trying to restore the greatness of Russia. And I think people sense that and see that and get that part. And that's part of the attraction. But there's also this revulsion that you just saw with the Moscow Times. So tell me what you think about this. I'm curious about your thoughts. Put it in the comments below. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.